Greetings and welcome to a very special video here on Fright Night Flicks, where every night is Fright Night. Today we're diving into the deep waters of the 1975 classic Jaws, which celebrates its 50th anniversary this year. But this isn't about honouring Jaws, we're celebrating 50 years of blockbuster filmmaking. And I won't be doing this alone. I brought back my friend and friend of the channel, Christopher Hyde, to join me in this discussion, this cinematic milestone.
Great. Let's get started.
Chris, welcome back. How's it feel to return as a guest on the channel?
Yeah, it's great. The last time we had a discussion like this, it was back in January? So
December for Nosferatu.
yes, December, that was it. So yeah, it's been quite a few months, but I'm, ready and raring to go.
Excellent. So I wanted to bring you on specifically to talk about Jaws at 50 and the impact it's had on cinema since its release. Now, I do like this film, but I don't think it's the flawless masterpiece others think it is. What's your overall thoughts on Jaws?
So for me, I find the film is okay. It's not by any stretch a masterpiece. That's not to do with the production troubles it went through or anything like that. It's more to do with the fact that out of Spielberg's films, it's the one that's most okay. I can watch it, but I don't necessarily take as much away from it as his other films.
No. For me, Jaws has its moments, and technically, it's outstanding. But I find the pacing is a bit slow in places. That's why I personally rate it a 4-star instead of a 5-star. Is there anything you would change in the writing or structure to improve the film's progression?
I don't think there's necessarily a problem with the film structure. I think it stands up quite well on its own. It's not a overly compelling film. It for me, I think it trivializes the nature of shark attacks and tries to make them out to be this absolutely horrific thing when in actuality sharks don't usually hunt people down unless they are either attacked, threatened, or are seeking prey. But I feel like with the film subject matter, it was what else can we turn into a horror? And during that mid-70s period, we were seeing the rise of slasher flicks, and it was also the exploitation era of cinema. So I feel like for me, it's not necessarily about the film's progression, but more the fact that the film tries to trivialize a something that is inherently not that common.
No, that's why I think Deep Blue Sea is a more compelling film, so it makes more sense.
Well, I think with Deep Blue Sea, the difference between the two is Deep Blue Sea focuses on the nature of science and going too far to make to improve these creatures. So when I see Jaws, it's like we need to make this scary, whereas with Deep Blue Sea, it's more of the allegory of don't mess with nature.
Yes, I kind of get you now. Like, this is more natural, whereas that's more science versus nature.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, I learnt a lot about this film because I had to study it for an English class back in high school in year 9. Do you think there's a lot to analyze in this film, academically speaking?
Well, I think when it comes to analyzing films, because I have done film analysis on many films during my sort of academic studies. I think it's one of those where yes, you can analyze this film in terms of its structure, its camera techniques, the way it uses sort of allegory and that kind of thing. But I find when you academically study a film, you lose the enjoyment of what the film's meant to be. You know, you're not meant to take a film as seriously as deconstructing it to its most basic points.
I get you. I get you. Maybe that's the reason why I don't love this film as much as other people, because I've had to analyze it for an English class, and it probably took my enjoyment out of this movie.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I deconstructed the film in Bruges, and I would say there's more to deconstruct with that film than there is with Jaws, because Jaws is just shark attacks on a holiday island, whereas within Bruges, it's more to do with the morality and it's got a lot of symbolism and references to sort of biblical like purgatory and stuff like that. So I think Jaws is just one of those where I personally don't see it as something you can overanalyze because it's very surface level.
Yeah, it is quite surface level. I mean, yeah, you can analyze like certain things like the color coordinations and what kind of each like shot means, but other than that, there's nothing in the subtextual storyline.
Precisely. There's nothing going on under the surface, which is ironic for a shark film.
Yeah, literally, literally. But one of my favorite aspects of this film is John Williams' iconic score, and of course Velma Fields' editing. They create so much tension with what they do to this film. Do you agree with me that they make this film thrilling?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you bring up John Williams actually, because Spielberg was having a really tough time trying to find the right composer for Jaws, because he wanted something that would stand out differently to all the other films coming out in that period. And I think it was George Lucas who introduced Spielberg to Williams, and immediately he knew that Williams was right for the for coming on board because of how he uses his classical background to kind of make these interesting and visceral music cues. You know, the opening shot with the iconic Jaws theme is
Yeah.
iconic because not just because of the directing, but because everyone knows that theme, and it's such a like an earworm that every time you hear the da 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 da, it's just it's musical poetry in a way. With
Yes.
the editing, I think the editor Werner, I think she does. Is it she?
Yeah, she.
She, yeah. Um, she does a very good job at conveying what needs to be seen in the sequence. So, you know, she does a very good job at taking all the footage and assembling it into such a way that it feels like seamless. That sometimes in films when you're watching it, the best way to know about bad editing is whether you can see a shot or a sequence that doesn't seem right, and then it takes you out of the film. Whereas with
Yes.
the editing in this film, I feel like it kind of plays as all one shot,
Yes.
where you can kind of you don't feel the editing, you don't feel the intrusiveness, you just sort of watch it and it glides seamlessly from A to B.
Definitely, definitely. After this film, uh, Spielberg brought on Michael Kahn, and he kind of became his editor since then. So it's interesting to see that he used to work obviously with Werner.
Yeah, well, I'm not familiar too much with Werner's work, but I do know that her approach on this film was needed. I mean, editors aren't as highly regarded as directors or producers or writers, or that there's very few editors that have made themselves household names, because you're not meant to know who's behind the editing, you're just meant to enjoy the film as it is. But with Werner, you can definitely tell it's one of her strongest um, jobs, one of her strongest career points.
Definitely, definitely. I also think Roy Scheider, Richard Dreyfuss, and Robert Shaw make a brilliant trio. They're the three best performances in the film. The character development and performances really drive them forward. What would you say makes their dynamic something special?
Well, it's interesting because Richard Dreyfuss initially turned down the role of Hooper twice. Um, and Charlton Heston wanted to play Chief Brody, but I think the cast, as you say, like I think there are very few actors that would have been able to take on the chameleonic sort of performances, because you don't when you watch the film you don't see the actors, you see the characters.
Yes, that's why they're so
Where
so well acted.
But if you compare Jaws to, like, I don't know, modern day equivalent The Meg, where it's a Jason Statham film.
Exactly.
So it's become less about actors becoming characters and the characters now becoming the actors. So I think Jaws works in the way that it held on to the classic movie star archetype of the
Yeah.
movie star becomes the character, and therefore you're there for the character.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm missing from modern films. I feel like the actors just pick roles based around their persona, not challenge themselves anymore. And that's kind of why I'm getting bored of seeing the same Jack Black or the same Jason Statham film.
Or Pedro Pascal.
Or Pedro Pascal.
Mm, mm. That's why I find I prefer films that really make the actor embody the role more than I see the actor for who they are.
Definitely, definitely. That's why I tend to stick more with underrated character actors, as you know.
Definitely.
Yes. Of course, this was the film that launched Steven Spielberg into the stratosphere. He has since built an iconic career and inspired countless filmmakers. Can you see how Jaws helped shape modern cinema as we know it?
I think in a way Jaws has had an impact in terms of modern cinema, but as we're celebrating the 50th anniversary, we've got to take into account that film is a rapidly changing genre, rapidly changing industry, and we are getting to the point where films are now becoming um films are now sort of becoming just products instead of like actual genuine films. And I think it
Yeah.
kind of I think you could probably see the inception of that in this film because Jaws was marketed as a blockbuster and it gave rise to what the blockbuster would be. But it also had a book written about, well, a book of the film that was written at the same point. So in terms of, I think it was the last of its kind to be just a genuinely interesting film because afterwards we saw how blockbusters would just be these corporate, push pieces. So yeah, I guess in a way you could definitely say that Jaws helped shape modern cinema, but whether or not that's for the better is still up for debate.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I get what you mean. But it helped. It helped horror.
I'd say it did help horror in a way, but then horror was already in its sort of golden era because we were seeing the likes of John Carpenter break out into horror and Toby Hooper break out into horror, and we were seeing honestly there's plenty more influential horror directors of the 70s than Spielberg because I don't find this this isn't necessarily a horror in my opinion. It's more of a sort of a paranoia. It
Yeah,
it doesn't scream horror to me because there's nothing truly sinister about the shark. It's just a shark. It's everyone around the shark reacting to it and making it out to be more of a villain when a shark is just a shark. It can't think or question its morality. It's just, I see people, I eat them.
yeah, that is basically it. And I don't really think Spielberg screams horror maestro to me. He's quite a diverse filmmaker. He makes action or history films a lot too.
Well, if we were going to really nail down the horror, you know, master filmmakers, Spielberg would probably be at the lowest of my list
Yes. Yeah.
because there's plenty more horror directors that push the genre further and give the
Absolutely.
genre more space to breathe. Whereas I think with Spielberg, it's kind of like, oh, I kind of want to do this next, instead of
Yeah.
actually caring about the genre he's working in.
Yeah. Yeah. He kind of tends to focus more on storytelling than sticking to one specific genre.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that famous fact that the shark kept breaking down during production, which forced Spielberg to show it less and essentially made a whole new kind of suspense film. How do you think the film would play out differently if the shark actually worked?
So I'm guessing you're talking about Bruce,
Yes.
the Bruce the shark, as I always thought his name was Jaws, to be perfectly honest.
Same.
Jaws the shark sounds like a better name than Bruce, and a bit more intimidating as well. But
Yeah.
I think it was the limitations of the technology of the time. You're working with a pretty much a puppet, but you're doing it in the water, in open water. So of course you're going to have issues, such as like seawater. Well, seawater is full of salt. Well, that's going to rust up the mechanisms, and that's going to make things difficult. Well, you could make a case that they should have really planned a bit, a bit more in advance, and maybe done some studio work to film the shark,
Yeah, you think they do that?
but this is the thing, is I think the whole purpose of not seeing the shark is an interesting technique. Obviously they had to work with the limitations, so they thought, okay, well, we'll scrap the shark for bits that we can't use it for, and we'll just use a camera instead and do it from the shark's perspective, which I think would be a good idea if it was a little bit more planned and less improvised. But there were ways of they were working with water way before Jaws, and I know everything wanted to be shot on location, and I think that's more of a mark on Spielberg than it is, the technicians trying to make the shark work. But I don't think it would have played out any differently if we had seen the shark. I just think that we would have got a bit more of an interesting perspective than just sort of camera shots underwater, which is, it's revolutionary for its time, but it's born out of a mistake. That's what I think people don't necessarily take away from that anecdote.
I think the same as well. I think people don't get that lesson at all. But I'll tell you another thing that didn't learn the lesson from this: sequels and remakes. Personally, I don't think Jaws needed 3 sequels, and I really don't want a remake. Do you think if they made more Jaws films or made a remake, it would damage the film's legacy?
Don't see how you could remake Jaws, because we've technically seen remakes in the likes of The Meg and Deep Blue Sea, and we've had these copycat films for time immemorium. So, I think if Hollywood were to turn around and go, we're going to remake Jaws, I think it would literally crash land, because no one cares about a remake of a film that's already been remade by other directors, and controversially to a better, higher standard.
Mm-hmm.
Deep Blue Sea most notably used interior locations and studio locations to film shark sequences, which, they took the lesson that we were just discussing. In terms of sequels, I think that's just a symptom of the I would say the whole point of Jaws is it is just a one film wonder. But I
Yeah.
think the whole aspect of commissioning sequels, well, that's just the studio machine. That's just, let's try and capitalize and make as much money as possible. And so we're going to make a sequel to a film that didn't really need one.
Yeah, definitely. Because I only remember bits of Jaws 2, and it wasn't as good as this one.
I think I've only seen Jaws 3D. Out of all the sequels, I can't really, to be honest. Once you've seen one shark film, you've seen them all.
Yeah. Yeah, same with Jason Statham movies.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yes. But looking back at 50 years of blockbuster filmmaking, I actually think cinema has progressed a lot. Better, smarter blockbusters have been made since. How do you think blockbuster filmmaking has changed over the past 5 decades?
I'd have to disagree with you. I think I semi-agree. I think I agree that we have um I think that there has been some progression in terms of, technology has evolved and the way filmmakers work has evolved. We've seen more creative filmmakers break out over the past 5 decades. But I don't agree with how films have overall got better. I think the standard has slipped a few times. I would say
Well,
maybe the golden era for blockbusters was probably the early 2000s.
yes.
But
Yes.
overall, I would say that, you know, the blockbuster reinvigorated the corporate system, and that's something that I think has actually made things worse and not better because, as we know, corporations are there to make money. So they've relied more on making sequels or remakes or different interpretations because they are clinging on to a formula, and
Yes.
formulas don't always work. If you want genuine creativity, you've got to break out of that formula.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, definitely. Because even the horror formula works most of the time, but there are times where they make it like really generic instead of trying something new with it.
I'd say the horror formula is different because yes, there is a horror formula, but the best directors have either subverted or have made that have pushed the genre forward. I'd say you can definitely tell a bad horror director by the fact that they they just can't, change or evolve or make things better. They have to rely on tropes and, you know, a lacking of creativity.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, I didn't like some like ones that have came out in the last 5 years. I personally thought the new Snow White and the new Minecraft film were awful. But I recently watched the new Fantastic Four film, and I was quite impressed because felt stylish. It felt cohesive. It didn't feel like a generic Marvel film. It felt like it was something different.
Um, well, I can't say anything about Fantastic Four because I don't really watch that many superhero films anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not a massive fan of the genre. I feel like it's kind of overstayed its welcome now, and it's
Oh,
sort of
definitely.
running on fumes. I think the most inventive superhero films are the ones where they really do try and push the genre forward. And
Yes.
unfortunately, over the past maybe 5 years, we've seen more of a stagnation in that department.
Yes, we definitely have seen a
Um,
stagnation.
but I think for me, I would say the most inventive films that have come out of the past 5 years are either action, um, maybe horror. Yeah, I'd say horror. Um, but it's. I'd say we've seen more of a resurgence in horror than any other genre. Comedy, as you know, has been dead for about 10 years now. The last great sort of comedy film came out sort of pre-Trump.
Yeah.
So, ever since the industry has kind of gone inverted, and we're just sort of pumping out more, again, formulaic, more of the same thing.
Yeah,
You know,
definitely.
I'd say the most inventive films of this year have been horror films. The best films on my list have been horror films. 28 Years Later is a masterpiece, obviously up until the last 5 minutes.
Yes.
But that's a different story. But I'd say it's the most inventive because it pushes filmmaking to a really interesting standard, whereas you see Fantastic Four and you're just getting a space film with heroes with wacky powers, and
Yeah.
it's kind of I it's like how I see, you know 28 years later, for example, I would say is like having a three-course dinner,
Oh,
you know,
definitely.
elegantly made, to a high standard, and then you watch something like Superman or Fantastic Four, and it's like having McDonald's.
Yes. Yes, definitely, definitely. When I watch something like Sinners or 28 Years Later, I'm feels like I'm going to some gourmet restaurant.
Oh yeah, like Sinners. Sinners is one of those where we've had the best film of this year come out, and it swept the industry, and
Yeah,
now we're getting into the sort of superhero summer, and it's like, okay, let's go back to eating, you know, fatty foods and this kind of stuff. Whereas I prefer watching films that feel like I've had a proper meal and I can really
yeah,
sink my teeth into.
yeah. Same here, same here, same here. And circling back to film's influence, do you think Jaws still holds value as inspiration for new generations of filmmakers coming in?
Um, I think you could make a case that it can still inspire people. I think that there are things to, like, the shot, the very famous shot that um
The
uh,
the close up,
uh the dolly zoom
yeah,
on the beach.
yeah,
Um so that was inspired by Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, but as
yeah.
we've seen, that shot has got more popular over the last 50 years,
Definitely. It's one of the best
and it's
shots in cinema.
and it's become more inventive and more experimental as well. I think people have really pushed it.
Definitely.
Um, but I think that's the most people have sort of been influenced by it. I wouldn't necessarily say Jaws influenced me as a filmmaker
No, and it
because
hasn't me either.
but I think that's only because with Spielberg, the main takeaway I have is how he tells a story. So
Yeah, same.
Jaws, I feel like, is the weakest of his storytelling films, whereas I prefer the more his storytelling. I prefer when it's pushed to an interesting level.
Yeah, that's why I liked his last film, The Fabelmans, because he told his childhood story quite effectively, and he didn't like use his own name. He used fictional characters to help tell the story.
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree with that. But you don't need a mechanical shark to tell that. You can rely on the actors, the story, the writers, the crew. You
Yeah,
don't need a mechanical shark that breaks down every 5 minutes.
no, no, you don't. Before we wrap up, is there anything you want to discuss in this video?
Well, it's interesting because the film was meant to take 55 days to film, which is kind of the average time you would spend on a production.
Yeah,
But it took place over 159 days, which I think is a very interesting thing to explore, because you can see how, when you dive into the background and the nature of the production, there were not scandals, but there were always things um affecting the film, like, the fact that they had to put more days onto the filming schedule to get the shots and the sequences that they wanted. There were even improvised lines that I think, are iconic to this day, and shows that the actors are very, very good at elevating the film. And I know that there was quite a few actors that were thinking, oh, this is gonna be like the end of my career, and what am I gonna do for work after this? And yet
Yeah.
it ended up making them the best, um the best careers. Some of them went on to make even better films.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And yeah, I think with Jaws, it has like kind of had a big lasting impact. Sure, it's not a dramatically depth film, but I think if we were in 1975 watching it, we would love it more.
Well, yeah, but I would say that's more because of the audience of the time. Most audiences that went to see the film, like most people in that generation that went to see the film as it was as it was released, will have a rose tinted view of that time. Whereas the 70s wasn't, this magical era. It was actually plagued with a lot of bad things. We had the Nixon Watergate scandal, and we had the threat of the Cold War, and there was still rationing in England in the 70s, because the economy hadn't recovered significantly. And I think that I have a rose tinted view of the early 2000s, but we know the early 2000s was plagued by its issues of, like, the 2008 economic crisis.
Oh, definitely.
So when it comes to people lauding praise over this film, you've got to really be careful, because nostalgia is an infectious thing, and nostalgia is something that
Well,
can warp your mind and make you think that it was better than it really was. So,
it's not. It's not just
it's
people who watched it in the 70s. It's people around our age. I was saying to people at work the other day that I thought the bits without the shark and Jaws are boring. They were like, "What the hell are you on about?"
well, I think with our generation, it's the fact that we've seen better films come out since
Yeah.
then. So, when you see a film like Jaws compared to, I don't know, Predator, the Arnold Schwarzenegger film.
Yeah.
Well, I prefer Predator, because it's a lot more engaging. The technology is a lot better. It doesn't require on puppetry or
No,
um
just a bloke in a suit.
it's a bloke in a suit. But you see how much things developed over 10 years, but you also see that someone can make an amazing film like Predator and then a boring film like Jaws. And for me, it's just one of those where I would say it's up to individual interpretations. But as you know, as a society, we like to try and be a monolith, and everyone has the same opinion, when in actuality, people have diverse opinions. And it's not a bad thing to dislike a film because it doesn't suit your interests. That's the whole point of discourse. You like something, I might not like it.
No, I have loads of all my reviews on this channel are my opinion. If people have different opinions to me, then I'm happy to hear them out.
Mm. And that's fair enough. I always think that I may not agree with your opinions, but the um I have the capacity to appreciate and respect your opinion without fully agreeing. And that's I think the core that's missing of this generation is
Absolutely.
I think we're too busy arguing what's better. My stick is bigger than your stick. My stick is better than your stick. And it's like, okay, but they're still the same stick. Doesn't really matter.
Exactly. I think with films, it's personal preference.
It's
It's how the
personal
art
preference, but I would say it's the fact that if you say like I like Jaws, oh I don't like Jaws, well you have to like Jaws. I
He
think
doesn't
that's
have to
where it
like the
gets.
film just because it's critically acclaimed.
Yeah, I think it's pressure, and it's pressure by those who think that, just because they've got a louder voice doesn't mean that their voice, what they're saying is actually accurate. It's just you've got a louder voice, so you're going to shout about it more. Well, I don't agree with you, so
I know people that love bad movies, but I don't shoot them down for it.
well, you know me. I notoriously like some bad movies. So some of my favorite films are bad movies purely because of the fact that they're just so funny.
I know, same.
Um, but yeah, I would say that, discussing Jaws and heaping praise on it is is okay, but you've got to also balance that praise with the criticism of it's not the greatest film of all time.
Yeah, and
You
I'm
know,
glad that me and you have that mindset because I feel like I'm gonna get loads of commenters saying, "What are you guys on about? Jaws is a masterpiece." It's like we're just not big on it. We think The Dark Knight is the best film of all time.
well, yeah, personally, in my opinion, The Dark Knight has a lot more that you could theoretically deconstruct and analyze than Jaws. But
Definitely.
there's people who keep claiming that Citizen Kane is one of the greatest films or the greatest film of all time, and it's come on. Citizen Kane was made in the what 30s, 40s.
And it is quite
You
boring.
know, it is, but it's like, come on. Film has only just passed its like 100th anniversary,
Yeah.
in terms of like actual proper films were starting to be made in the 1920s.
Yeah.
Filmmaking was born in the 1920s. We are in the 100th anniversary of that generation. We can't keep saying that films from the 20s and 30s are the greatest films of all time when we have the technology to make better films.
Oh, definitely. And neither films. Well, if you personally like The Godfather, it's fine because again, The Godfather is more about the storytelling compared to Jaws.
Well, even with The Godfather, it pushes the genre forward. It gives filmmakers, creatives, the chance to build on the shoulders of the previous generation. And, you know, I mean, I would say personally, Apocalypse Now is better than The Godfather,
Oh, absolutely.
purely because I prefer the storytelling in that film. But I know so many people who hype The Godfather as the greatest film ever made, and it's like, okay, I respect your opinion. I
In
just
my
don't agree with it.
defense, it took me like 10 watches to fully appreciate it.
Exactly. So if you can't appreciate it on your first watch, then is it really the greatest film?
I personally prefer Goodfellas.
I would agree. I would agree with that. But I personally rate Scorsese as a better filmmaker of gangster films than Coppola. I feel like Coppola is
Absolutely.
more of a stylistic director than an actual sort of substance.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. And I'm going to have to wrap things up today, Chris. But thank you for joining me for this special discussion. This is a video I've been looking forward to making all year, and I'm so glad we finally done it. I'm hoping to have you back onto a film where we could do another deep dive into horror cinema one day.
Yeah, well, I'm mostly available, mostly always. I do have my own stuff that I do as well, but I always do like discussing films, and especially when, a good anniversary comes round or there's a big release. I loved our Nosferatu video because I thought it was an interesting topic that not many people really explore, whereas Jaws is something that we've both seen plenty of times and we both have opinions of, and we're in this safe space that we can easily share and discuss and debate those.
Definitely, definitely. Like I said, I'm kind of glad you have a similar opinion to me on this film.
I think we have similar opinions. I don't necessarily agree with everything, but I also respect your opinion to the point where, if you say that you like this particular thing, I'll go, okay, that's fair enough, but it's not my cup of tea. But
Yeah,
we can still appreciate each other's opinions, and I think that's the key of discourse. We can't just have my stick's better than your stick, because that's not film discussion.
no, no. Definitely not. Definitely not. You gotta break down the film. You gotta break down the stick. You can't just show off the stick first thing.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you all for watching today's video, and thank you to Chris for coming on. If you're new here, please make sure you check out all my past videos. Hit that like button, subscribe to Friday Night Flicks, and follow us on social media so you don't miss a single scare. Please share your thoughts on Jaws and our discussion in the comments down below, and join me next time when I cover Stanley Kubrick's classic, The Shining. Until then, stay spooky.